now I'm going to welcome up to the stage David Hahn. Small story is I'm going to have my phone out. It's got some of my questions on it. I'm not like tweeting or anything at the moment. But I first met David almost 10 years ago when he was 24 and I was a much younger 28. And LinkedIn was this tiny little company. It was like 20, 25 people. And David walked in and he was introduced as a new sort of corp dev strategy guy working with Keith Raboy, who you guys might know, went on to Slide and Square. And he had a background in politics, and I was like the only product manager at LinkedIn at the time with this guy Alan Blue, who's still there, and I was like, what is this guy doing? And like, what's he gonna do for the company? He was like, strategy, what's that? And we were just trying to like build stuff. And
to be clear, I was wondering the same thing at the time.
Okay, good. We're just trying to make LinkedIn grow, and yet he just stepped down pretty recently after this incredible 9-year run, where starting from that point, he grew to become kind of the VP of like all revenue products at LinkedIn. And this is a company that's made $1.5 billion. So, it's gone from kind of the social network, how will it ever make money, to this really important foundational company that's not just a great foundation, but also like a really profitable, really successful, just generating tons of money. And, I just thought it'd be great to kind of have this story, because I think all of us just in our product careers, like, how do we grow? How do we get those skills? How do we be at this small, early startup company that becomes this big behemoth, and in many ways sort of like gain the skills to really grow into, a true kind of leader and executive. And so, I thought it'd be great to kind of have David up here and share some of his journey. I love to just start with, lots of consumer products, that we really think about. They always say, oh, we're just going to get big first and then turn on revenue. But is it really that easy? And I can't imagine, like that it's ever that easy. Like, how did LinkedIn think about this in the early days?
Yeah. So first of all, hello. It's really an honor to be here, you guys. I looked over the list when I was walking in the door, and I realized there's a couple of LinkedIn folks that actually worked on my team. I guarantee, at least in the LinkedIn folks' case, they're going to be running $1.5 billion businesses in about half the time that it took me to. And if that's an indication of the rest of you, this is going to be a great recruiting list, and I hope you don't mind if I recruit aggressively from it, over the next couple of years. So, building revenue at LinkedIn was anything but easy. I just had, as Josh mentioned, I had a 9-year run, and some of the other kind of early LinkedIn folks, in particular, we have a board member here, who will remember with me, and Josh knows this, it took us about 4 or 5 years to figure out what was going to be kind of the breakout revenue strategy for LinkedIn. So, I mean, just as an example, how many folks in the room have even been in their current role for that long? Raise your hands. Okay, so like 2 of you. Congratulations. So, first of all, in our case, it took real dedication and a real serious amount of time. It took a lot of experimentation. So, I remember in the early days, there were 3 or 4 business models that we really tried to make work. We really invested in. In one case, in fact, we hired a very bright guy as the GM of the business, and those businesses are no longer. Turns out in that case, we moved him, and he was very talented in another part of the business. But you try and fail, and so that's been a big part, of LinkedIn's story, for sure. But I think the key thing in LinkedIn's case, we knew that we were building an asset that would ultimately be incredibly valuable. We knew if we completed our mission of being the professional record for every professional out there, that asset was going to be valuable to a lot of different people. We weren't sure exactly how. Was it going to be recruiting? Was it going to be sales? Was it going to be the ads data? We just didn't know, but we knew that asset was valuable. I think on the other hand, you meet companies and they say, well, we're going to figure out monetization later. We really have no idea. We don't really know if the asset that we're building is valuable. We'll put ads up, down the road. And having run an ads business, what you realize, unless you're a top 10 site, top 20 site, you're really not going to build an ads business at massive scale. And again, massive scale is like a multi-billion-dollar company. And so, I met with a company a couple weeks ago, and they have an ad-supported model, but they have an ad-supported model within a business that's focusing on a pretty niche audience. And I was there too at one point. I was like, oh, we're going to have professional data. We're going to have these really high CPMs. People are going to pay us, $40 CPM, and it doesn't matter if people use LinkedIn. We're going to make, hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reality with these ads businesses, you just need incredible scale. And so, so I would say, the short answer is it's okay if you don't have it all figured out on day one, but you should have some macro concept in mind. And if that macro concept is, hey, someday we're just going to go throw ads on the site, you better damn well make sure you're going to be a top 10 site out there.
Well, so how did LinkedIn like figure out how we're going to make money? Like, what was kind of the nut that like you got really excited that it just really opened up?
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of experimentation, and one of the ways that we really figured it out, and you were a part of this when we first launched InMail, and InMail essentially allowed people to reach out to others in the network, people that weren't directly connected to them. And what we started doing then, as most good product managers do, and everybody has talked about this morning, is you look at the data, and what the data in our case told us is there are very specific kinds of people that got an incredible amount of value out of reaching out to people that they didn't know. And they were all outbound professionals. They were all salespeople or BD people or recruiters. And so then we're able to sit back and say, okay, how does it make sense to prioritize these various groups that all seem to have a real need for reaching out to other people and having cold introductions? And then what we started to realize was that there actually was a right way to prioritize it. And it wasn't, as you might think, by market size or penetration or market growth rate. What we started to realize is there was a segment, and it turned out to be recruiters, whereby we could create an ecosystem where we could monetize people, and at the same time our users would get value out of it. And so if you think about the monetization that LinkedIn set up, we have what we've called this golden triangle. And that is where you have a recruiter who is paying us for something incredibly valuable, but they're sending in-mails to people about recruiting them. And we've done survey after survey, and people receiving the in-mails are the majority of the time, they're neutral to very positive. At worst, they love their job, but they're flattered someone's reaching out for them. At best, they just heard about their next career opportunity. And so as we're monetizing, it's actually something that's extremely positive for our users. And so that's why when we looked at some of these various segments to go after, we looked at these segments that were getting early traction using a product that was pretty basic at the time. We said, aha, it's recruiting, let's go deep. And that's when we decided to really invest in a very specific enterprise product for recruiting. That's how we took something that was more of a generic in-mail capability and said, no, we're going to go deep and build an $8,000 a seat, it's even more expensive these days, an $8,000 a seat enterprise product specifically focused on these users. So it was really looking at that data, but then recognizing that part of any successful ecosystem, given how important consumers were going to be in our equation, it had to be a positive experience. It couldn't degrade that experience.
Well, I mean, there always is this tension. Like commercials sit there and interrupt a TV show. Like, as a product manager sitting in the company where you have sales on one side, you might have other product managers in the company, like, what's actually a day-to-day situation where you're working through that? And like, how does LinkedIn break through some of those challenges when everybody's competing?
Yeah, so that is absolutely was the hardest part of my job, and it wasn't the hardest part of my job in year one and not in year 9. Every year I was there, the debate about where do we put that line, and in our case it wasn't so much about ads, although ads are certainly part of the experience, but it was about how much of the database to give access to. Is it first degree is free? Is it second degree is free? Is it third degree? And so we had to figure out sort of where to put that line. And I think one, there's not a perfect answer. There's not some perfect quantitative analysis to figure it out. And so what you have to do, which is hard sometimes, you got to go back to some of your first principles. But I think one of the things that I realized throughout that process is much better to err on the side of the user. Because one of the incredible things that I don't think a lot of people realize about LinkedIn's business, and certainly other freemium businesses, is how genius they are in terms of distribution. The life of a sales guy at LinkedIn is incredible. They don't go hunting for cold leads. They open up a screen, and that screen tells them active recruiters that are as close as possible in their network that have been doing a lot of recruiting activity on LinkedIn already. And so they pick up the phone to a very warm lead that already knows what our product does, has been using our product, and so their job, of course, is to close that particular person and then usually to get more business within that particular company. But they're not cold calling in most cases. And so that's what the freemium spectrum allows you to do. You get to attract for zero cost zero cost. I mean, we weren't doing, we had a couple of marketing campaigns that we did, and we have a great former LinkedIn marketer in the room, but we weren't marketing really to acquire those customers. Those customers were coming in because we had a great free product that they really could get a lot of value out of without paying us. And so you can imagine the debate. You were there for part of the debate. And the debate is, wait a second, here's Joe. We can look in the analytics. Joe's getting way too much value out of this for free. Why aren't we monetizing Joe? And the answer is the only reason Joe's there and the other 50 people like him, or 500,000 people like him really, is because that free product is attracting him in and then makes it so easy for a very competent sales team to then close that business and really expand the business.
Cool. So one of the other tensions is, I talked to a lot of like engineers and people here who say, God, I just get hit all the time by recruiters on LinkedIn. I don't find any value in that. And I'm sure you have people on, other product teams that come to you and be like, we just got to shut them down and make it stop. And I think both Uber and Flywheel talked a little about what they kind of do for driver quality. Like, how do you guys fight that tension when you got this guy who really wants to pay a lot because he wants to hit, if I had just hit 100 engineers, I'll make more money?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple of things happen. So, for us, I think there's some of the things that were talked about today, things like feedback scores, we have, that in place and actually from the early days for things like InMail. So that's all there. For us, price, the price of an InMail also becomes a powerful impediment. If you're sitting there and you're literally just emailing, pretty much anyone you can think of, that starts to get pretty darn expensive. And so, we always liked that as a mechanism to make sure that people were being thoughtful about the messages that they were sending. I think, it's also important to remember we live in a very special place. I have, a younger brother that's an engineer, and, I have to admit there's been a couple times when we're having dinner together where he says, oh, David, I'm just getting so many InMails, so many people are trying to recruit me. And my response to him is, wow, it's really rough life, man, especially relative to the rest of the country. So, we live in a pretty special place. I'd say, maybe those in this room and about 100,000 other people across the Bay are in a position where they're just overwhelmed with InMails and overwhelmed with interest in hiring. And I feel really sorry for all of you.
So can you talk a little about the product process now? Talk a little bit about, like, as you've gotten to, $1.5 billion in revenue, like, how do you prioritize the next projects? What does a product manager really now do to think about this on the revenue side? I think, a lot of us kind of come from sort of more consumer backgrounds. We think about how do we get more users, but I think, how do you actually balance the importance of that and weigh that in the roadmap?
Yeah, so it's just as challenging on the monetization side as I think it is on the consumer side. I think the only insight I can really give that is different from what might seem obvious is we focus an incredible amount of investment on our core products, just continuing to reinvest in our core products. And so when you think about it, some of the debates are like, okay, well, we're at a product review or whatever else, and someone will ask the question, okay, well, how are we going to monetize this new set of features? Are we going to charge extra for it? How's this going to work? And the reality is most of the time our answer biases towards, nope, let's put that back into the product where we already have a strong customer base. Because what you start to realize, especially in the monetization world, acquisition is important, but retention is incredibly important. So if month after month, quarter after quarter, you can keep your existing customers happy, the way that plays out from a financial perspective is so incredibly powerful. And so, I'd say, I'm just giving sort of rough numbers here, and things are probably now done differently now that I've left, but probably 70% of our product investment was simply going back into products where we weren't going to be charging incrementally for, but we're just going to make our existing customers happier. And when you get to the scale of a product like LinkedIn, when you're, I think LinkedIn will do $2 billion in revenue this year, that's some pretty serious scale. It means you have a lot of customers, and that's why just the math works out that retention, is so important. But it also means a lot of people are now aware of the business, and a lot of people say, wait a second, we weren't really tracking this whole LinkedIn thing. Turns out to be a pretty great business. Why don't we build something like it? And so you get a lot of people trying to attack and compete with the business. And that's why it becomes even more important not to forget, not to say, okay, well, we've won this area. Let's go start in sort of this new battlefield and create this new thing. And but that's really the tension that I see every day is you get a bunch of smart product managers, you get a bunch of great executives, and a lot of people are thinking about the new shiny thing. But the great product managers, they're really smart about staying focused, and they're even smarter about staying focused on the core.
great. And so, look, I still remember you as the new kid, but I mean, it's clear, and just in watching, LinkedIn, you've become like a really kind of seasoned, executive and leader, and you were running a team of, how many PMs were on your team, before you left? It was
25.
About 25 or 30 PMs, right? And so, like, what are some of the things that, you really sort of built in yourself as you kind of grew your career, and obviously now what you would be looking for as you're mentoring kind of the next rising up, PMs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is less sort of a skill or attribute, and it's just simply make sure the person you're working for is the right person. Because in my case, so my first boss was Keith Raboy, and my second boss was Reid Hoffman, and they're pretty legit dudes, but more importantly, they had a very specific outlook on the world of talent, and their outlook was really two things. One, to take risks on people that didn't really, sort of fit as well, but they kind of saw something. I'm not sure what they saw in my case, but in other cases, it's made a lot of sense. But perhaps even more importantly, they really focused on designing roles where people were underwater. And so for the first 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, every one of my roles, my head was so far underwater, I had no idea really what I was doing. And but what that meant was that my, sort of my learning trajectory was unlike any place that I could have gone. And so I've seen sort of two managerial styles out there. One of somebody that says, you know what, I think this person has the potential to be X. So I'm going to hire them into this role now, and I'm going to let them grow into it. And other people who say, well, no, I need to find the person that's already done X. And I think, just from a selfish perspective, and for those of you that are thinking about your careers, you really want the former, because they're going to give you those experiences that, frankly, you don't even really deserve yet, and you certainly don't have the training for yet. But that's going to allow you to accelerate in your career, I think, so much faster. And those are really the opportunities that were afforded to me. I think the other, in terms of attributes and pieces of advice, I mean, one of the things that I've always found most valuable, and I don't know if it was Pincus or other folks that sort of coined this phrase, but sort of the product manager is the CEO. A lot of people sort of say that and throw it around. I'm not sure if people really understand the extent to what that really means. And for me, especially in my early days, that meant some things that looked very different than what you might expect from product. And so, for instance, when I was building LinkedIn's first ads platform, one of the things that we realized is an ads platform isn't much good unless you can get advertisers onto the platform. And we had no advertisers at the time. We had no sales team at the time. So I remember a very specific point in my life where I was spending a lot of time getting on planes, first cold calling, then getting on planes to ad agencies in New York. Now, I had never sold before. I had never talked to somebody at an ad agency before. And yet I realized that in terms of getting the product across the line and making it successful, because to be clear, that's all that matters. Making the products you're responsible for successful. That's it. No excuses. So I couldn't have gone and said, hey, guys, well, I built this great ads platform. Sorry, it's not going to work because there's no salespeople here and whatever. So you actually get out there and have to get it across the finish line. And so that I think is quite important. I think the other side of kind of being the CEO of your product also gets back to sort of no excuses. Some of the things I hear from more junior product managers sometimes, or less effective senior product managers, is things like, well, yes, this is how the product ended up, but it ended up this way. The designers on my team, this is kind of what they decided they wanted to do, and I kind of had to go with it. And imagine a CEO, imagine a great CEO. Do you think Jeff Weiner ever makes excuses like that? Do you think he ever points to somebody else on his team and says, well, this happened because David Hahn screwed this thing up? It just doesn't happen. And so you have to have that same mentality. You got to own it, and you got to make sure that the thing that you're putting out into the world as a product person, you fully stand behind. You sign. It's your piece of art that you're signing. And so, and if you don't feel that way about it, then you shouldn't be shipping it. And when you do, and when it is like that and you have signed it, you got to really own it and make sure that you're not making excuses. So I think that's really important. I think the final thing, and my 22-year-old self would have thought I was a complete tool for saying this, but communication. I mean, it sounds like such a soft skill, but what I've realized over the years is that great communicators in organizations are great communicators because of a bunch of substance underneath. And so the thing that differentiates the people that were on my team that are getting, promoted at rates you wouldn't believe is they're incredibly effective communicators. What does effective communicators mean? Well, one, there's a woman I can think of who is just fantastic. And, this is like in her mid-20s. And I can remember her having a conversation with somebody very senior in our organization who was pushing back. And the level of assertiveness and conviction that she exhibited creates real confidence on the side of the listening executive. And you only get that if you have a level of depth in your products that is second to none. You only get that if you really believe in what you're doing. Otherwise, somebody very senior that might be 2 decades older asks a couple hard questions. And by the way, that's what great executives are paid to do. And you fall off the rails. And so, I think, that sort of communication, that sort of presence. But, and then I think the other part of great communication, is really simplifying things from a communication perspective. If everybody really doesn't understand what you're doing, then you're not setting yourself up for success. And I've seen very bright people overcomplicate what they're doing, overcomplicate their communication. And when their communication is overcomplicated, it often means that they aren't as well organized and aren't as well focused as a team. And so, I would make sure that if you can't walk away and explain what you're doing and why you're doing it in the amount of time it's going to take for a busy CEO who's managing lots and lots of other things to really grok it, understand it, be able to repeat it a week later, make sure that he's supportive of it or he or she's supportive of it, then you really haven't done your job. So I think that's critically important. I was in a conversation once where somebody said, "Well, this is a great product manager, but they're just not very good on the communication side." And you're like, "Well, guy, that's 101. That's product 101. You got to get there." And so I've seen many people who didn't start out that way and really got much better. So I think there's hope for people that aren't naturally great at communicating. But I think that's just so much of the role.
No, that's great. I mean, I think communication. I think a lot of what we're trying to talk about today is people sort of not just learning and doing good work, but also being able to really share and communicate it effectively. So first, just a big round of applause for David, and a big thank you.
Good to see you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.